Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm going to start with an introduction to me first, and then I'll invite you to say who you are. So I'm Dr. Anna Tarrant. I'm a associate professor in sociology at the University of Lincoln, and also the director of a new qualitative longitudinal study called Following in Fathers Further.
And I'm Dr. Karen Hughes. I'm an associate professor in sociology at the University of Leeds, and I'm the director of the Timescapes Archive.
Thank you. And together we have published recently on qualitative secondary analysis, which is what our conversations that we're recording are very much about. So the aim of this short video is to expand on some of the things that we were discussing in relation to using QSA in dissertations. Now, one thing that I've observed in the delivery of sort of independent study modules, if you like, is that dissertation structures are very much presented as an and/or approach. So either conducting desk-based research, which is usually based on a literature review, or doing primary research, so going out and into the field, talking to people or using creative methodologies. But what I would like to suggest actually is that QSA offers kind of a middle ground between those two and/or approaches. So Karen, I'm going to invite you just to speak about that a little bit and reflect on, how we might use existing qualitative data within dissertations as kind of a mid-road between those and/or approaches.
Yeah. So just to start off with, what a literature review is meant to do in a dissertation is a literature review is to establish a bona fide research question. So the idea of it is that it demonstrates that a student hasn't simply plucked an idea out of the air and, after maybe a bit of a session down the pub with their mates and said, I know what I want to do for my dissertation. This is what I'm going to do. It's like, well, that might be a great topic area and you might be very, very passionate about it.
That's how we started ours, wasn't it?
It's in Prague. I don't know if we had some beer, probably.
Likely.
Yeah, I mean, so okay. So
we did say this series would be warts and all.
it is a bit of a warts and all thing, but the point is we didn't leave it there. We didn't just say and another thing. We then went and did a bit of work, and so a literature review is precisely that work. So people, do, I think research is always semi-autobiographical, because what research often does is reflect people's passions. Particularly in the social sciences, we pursue things, well, in all sciences, it doesn't matter, people go into their field because they're interested in it. And when you do a dissertation, I mean, my biggest word of advice is, whatever you're really, really interested in, turn it into a research question. Really, really go with something that you feel very strongly and passionately about. And that's what people commonly do. So there you are, you've got passion, you've got a set of interests, you've got something that's been nagging at you and teasing at you a little bit. And so the point of the literature review is to engage in a scholarly way with the scholarship in your discipline. That's what you do. So you read, you go and see who has done what sorts of research in which ways about a particular topic. What were the questions that they asked? Who did they speak to in the developing of their research? What literature did they draw on? Who did they then research with? Who did they engage with? And what were the questions that they asked? And how did they engage in that research? And so the literature review, I always think of it as a sort of a funnel shape, like that, an inverted triangle. So at the top, you've got the general area of interest. Then you've got who are the key figures in the field, how they have refined particular questions through their own careful scholarship, and the historical development of a particular debate, what the key features are, how has it been refined within your discipline? What were the key things that they found in the particular area of interest that you would like to, that you think were particularly important? And what are the gaps that they've left? And it's precisely at that point, at that gap, they researched in this way and they found out these lovely things. But because they didn't do it in this way, they weren't able to ask these sorts of questions. So research is always limited. And when we critically engage with existing evidence in that scholarly way, we're able to bring ideas together from different researchers, from different disciplines, and open up areas for questioning. We can understand it in this way, but we're not quite sure here. So what we do then, what we've done is through that process is that we've refined a question, and it's a bona fide question in another sense. It's a scholarly question. It's a question that's been produced through our own scholarship, based on the scholarship of others. And that's the purposes of a literature review. So normally on the basis of that, people then bounce out into primary research and they say, right, I'm going to go and research this myself with these people and so forth, and I'm going to do that. If it's an extended literature review or desk-based process, that whole dissertation is the formulation of a set of problems and debates that you might resolve through engagement across the literature. But when you put and across different sorts of evidence as well, so you using different sorts of, it might be policy documents or various other things like that. So you're saying this sort of evidence can help me answer these sorts of things. But qualitative secondary analysis, you're right, sits in that juncture, doesn't it? Because it's data that have been produced by other people. So you're not the primary researcher conducting research in the context of that particular question, you know, and that's what you're going to ask in that way. You're bringing that question to existing data. But by doing that, qualitative secondary analysis, I think, can do two sorts of things. So one is that it can open up the possibilities of questions that weren't asked. So in our previous video, we talked about how you undertook research on data that I had been involved in producing, and you saw things in it that I hadn't seen in it, and you made me see it in a different way. Yeah. So that process of that engagement in qualitative secondary analysis can be used in a reflexive way to look, if you like, look back at debates and to make us aware of the questions that they haven't yet seen. Mm-hmm. But I think equally, qualitative secondary analysis does have the capacity to answer new questions, but the questions have to be framed and shaped in terms of what those data can speak to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference. If it's primary research that you're doing yourself, you can shape all the questions as you go along and ask people directly. I want to know about this bit of your school run. You know, I need to know what conversations you have at the school gates. You know, how important are other parents in understanding this relationship between, you know, family and school boundaries or something like that. And you can ask people about that. But the study might not be exploring that directly. It may have some data on that, but it might not be exploring it directly. Yeah. So qualitative secondary analysis sits at that juncture where your analyses are shaped by the literature, but they're also shaped by what it is that those data can tell you. So it's normally, I mean, the stuff that you and I have done, commonly what we find is that we are able to generate new substantive insights on the basis of our analysis. But also what we do is identify the limitations of those particular data to answer all of the questions that we might have. So, and then that's a good way of reflecting back on the literature. They weren't aware of those questions. This is a good way of reflecting back and critically engaging with the literature.
Yes. And just to conclude, I mean, you mentioned quite early on in the conversation about timeframes. So this is kind of a practical question, if you like.
Yeah.
Is engagement with data quick?
No. No, not at all. And this is a really interesting one. It depends, I mean, because in the same way that one gets familiar with a field, you know, a research site or a field, you have to learn who the people are, you have to have conversations with them, you have to understand where you might be able to access your participants and how you might be able to get hold of them. You have to negotiate with your participants and so on and so forth. So there's lots of negotiations that go on, which are part of finding out who your sample are in qualitative research. Similarly, in qualitative secondary analysis, you have to find out what those data are, and there's all sorts of metadata. And I think it can be summarized in 3 different ways. Metadata that have been produced by the originating team. And those are data that describe the data. So who they were, what they were researching, why, when they were researching, how they researched and what they found out and with whom and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, the research questions, yeah.
The research questions and all the research documentation, those metadata. So you can become, they're normally archived with the data set. Often they have to be because that helps the data set be organized in a repository.
Yeah.
There's another sort of metadata. People don't call it that, but it's the literature, it's the papers and the outputs from the originating team. So you have to go and read some of that, and that really helps orientate you towards around the data set. So you've got an idea what they were talking about and with whom and what they were, how they were pitching their questions and so forth. And then there's a third sort, which is what you and I have done, which is actually have conversations with the originating team. And I would say, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think researchers love talking about their research.
Yeah, oh, definitely.
We really love it. It's like, you know, we're doing it for years and years and years, and then writing papers and hoping people are going to like read the papers. So I actually think students, again, they really miss this trick of emailing the originating researchers and setting up an hour's meeting and talking to them about their data. And I bet they would be surprised at how many researchers are willing to say, actually, okay, I can't do it this week, but maybe next week, and they'll go for it. They'll tell you about their data and what happened and some juicy bits and things like that, because that was what research is about, passion. They're passionate about their research, you know.
Yeah.
So that's a third form of this sort of metadata. And another way I think that you and I, we talk about it is about it's about contextualizing the contextual embeddedness of data, where they were, why people did it, what they thought was important about it. And you can ask those questions to somebody and say, look, you know, I'm interested in this particular thing. Do you think it's in your data set? And someone will say, well, actually, yeah, we've got a participant, you know, called Paula, and she told us this, and that's really powerful. So they can orientate you into the data set, but it's not quick. And then you've got to read the transcripts as well. And an hour's interview is like 2-3 hours reading at least, without any coding.
That's just the surface.
That's just the quick. That's just the first read.
Yeah. So I mean, data is available in data repositories, archives. As you mentioned, you can contact researchers. So if there's a particular set of research data you're interested in that isn't archived, students can access that. One thing that I've discovered through teaching is the UK Data Service has access to some classic sociological studies, for example. So you can actually go back and look at historical studies and analyse that data and really get to grips with some of the findings of perhaps your sociological heroes, or, you know.
I know.
Well, so that's another exciting thing.
Well, it was Pete Townsend, wasn't it? And his classic poverty study. It was he who was saying, I've done these years and years of very important sociological research. What's going to happen to my data? Is that it? They're never going to be used again. So it was actually Pete Townsend that really set the fire under this sort of engine of data archiving and reuse, and really stimulated those debates quite a few decades ago now. But yeah, well done him. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of juicy stuff. I don't know, it's like very exciting. And people have also got paper data sets as well, so it doesn't necessarily mean that they've been digitized, and it may well be that they would be absolutely delighted if you would sample from it and maybe digitize a bit as a student, maybe use 4 or 5 interviews, and scan them and digitize them and make them usable, or archive them yourself, or do some. I mean, there's all sorts of projects that people would love to happen with their data.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's partly why there's been this drive, isn't it, towards archiving and the storage of qualitative data, and then the accompanying debates that follow that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.